My name is Ellie Carver, and I'm 32 years old. I'm an emergency room nurse, but I've always been more comfortable in the chaos of my job than I ever was at home. I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Large, cold, and as empty as the air in the dead of winter. My father, Walter Carver, a man with a smile that never reached his eyes, always demanded perfection. My half-sister, Ava, was the golden child, constantly praised, constantly put on a pedestal. Me, I was always the outsider, the failure who couldn't measure up to their standards. And when I broke my hand at work and had nowhere else to go, I had no choice but to return to that house. I told myself it was temporary, just until my hand healed and the bills caught up. But as soon as I stepped back through the door, I felt the cold air settle deep into my bones, just like before. There was something wrong in that house, something I couldn't put my finger on, and it wasn't just the frost on the windows. I never expected Christmas Eve would end with me lying motionless in the snow, my father's cold face watching me from the window above. The air outside was sharp, biting. Every breath felt like inhaling glass. The house loomed in the distance, warm lights glowing, an illusion of comfort, of something I had never had. I didn't want to be here. I never did. But the injury to my hand and the financial ruin that came with it left me no choice. Seattle's rent was impossible without full-time work, and the workers' compensation claim was still in limbo. It was too late to back out now. I was stuck in this house again, playing my role as the quiet daughter, the one who didn't belong. Dinner's almost ready. Walter's voice echoed from upstairs as I stood at the bottom of the stairs, frozen in place. My pulse quickened. I hadn't forgotten the way his voice cracked with authority, the way every word he spoke felt like a reminder of how small I'd become in his eyes. Ava's laughter drifted down from upstairs, a sound that grated against the fragile calm I was trying to maintain. It had been years since I'd lived here, but some things never changed. Ava, now 26, was still the same, the spoiled, perfect daughter. Every step she took seemed to scream, "Look at me! See how much better I am than you." And there I was, in the faded dress I'd grabbed out of the back of my suitcase. I had hoped it would make me blend in, but nothing made me blend in with my family. Dinner was already set, the table gleaming with silverware and candles. The room smelled like Christmas, cloves, and cinnamon, but it only made the emptiness more suffocating. Walter's business partners were already here, their voices loud and forced. The air was thick with strained politeness, the kind you don't get to escape unless you leave. And leaving wasn't an option. Not for me, not yet. I sat at the far end of the table, barely able to keep my hand still. My wrist ached every time I reached for my glass or a piece of bread. I tried to act normal, to blend in, but Ava wouldn't let me. "So, Ellie," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you're not working right now. Something about an accident at the ER." The room fell silent. All eyes were on me. The tremor in my left hand was barely visible, but to them it might as well have been a signal of weakness. I forced a smile, pushing the humiliation down. I hadn't planned for this. "It's temporary," I said, "just waiting for my hand to heal." I squeezed my fingers together, trying to suppress the tremor that threatened to betray me. Denise, my stepmother, chuckled lightly. "Poor thing. I'm sure it's hard losing your grip." Her voice had the fake sweetness of someone who pretended to care but didn't. Ava shot me a look from across the table, the look of someone who saw my presence as a mistake, something she could easily discard. The words that left her lips next hit harder than I expected. "You know, Emily used to work in the ER," she said loudly to one of the guests, used to being the key word. The business partners snickered, exchanging looks behind their wine glasses. My cheeks burned. I bit my lip, swallowing down the rising frustration. I was determined to make it through the night without causing a scene. But I knew, deep down, that I was already failing. Walter's voice suddenly cut through the silence. "Emily, pour the wine for the guests, please." I nodded, my hand trembling as I reached for the bottle. As I tried to steady my grip, the shaking grew worse. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. The bottle slipped from my fingers. The wine splashed across the table, just enough to stain the linen. The room went still. Ava's gasp was exaggerated, a sharp inhale of mock shock. One of the business partners glanced at his plate, pretending to focus on the food. But I saw it, the look in Walter's eyes. The anger, the disappointment. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Not again," he muttered, his voice cold, controlled. "You've embarrassed me again." Before I could even react, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin with painful force. He pulled me toward the stairs, his grip tightening with every step we took. I didn't resist. I couldn't. There was no point. When we reached the landing, he shoved me backward. The window was right behind me. I didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. The cold glass pressed into my back. I had barely a moment to comprehend the pain before the window shattered. The world tilted. I could hear nothing but wind rushing past my ears. I fell faster than I could react, and the snow, which had seemed soft from above, felt as solid as stone when I hit the ground. Pain exploded through my back, my ribs. I couldn't breathe. My limbs were heavy, numb. The snow cradled me, but it wasn't enough to cushion the blow. The last thing I saw was the outline of my father's silhouette behind the broken window. He stared down at me for a moment, and then he pulled the curtains closed. I was alone. The cold hit me in waves. My body felt like it was being torn apart, but the numbness was spreading, taking over. The pain from my fall was nothing compared to the cold that was slowly suffocating me. I fought to stay awake, but my eyelids were heavy. I could feel the wind biting at my skin, the snow melting on my shoulders, freezing before it could soak through. I tried to move, to scream, but my voice was nothing more than a faint, broken breath that dissolved in the wind. And still no one came. I never thought Christmas Eve would end like this, with me lying motionless in the snow, my father's cold face watching me from the window above. I lay there, the cold gnawing at me, trying to devour every inch of my being. My body felt disconnected, like it belonged to someone else, as if my limbs were no longer mine to control. The ground beneath me was hard, solid, unforgiving. I could barely feel my fingers, my hands numb, but I could still sense the sting of the wind cutting through my cheeks, tearing at the last shreds of warmth inside me. The pain in my ribs was sharp, searing through every breath I tried to take. It hurt to move, but every part of me screamed to fight the cold, to stay alive. I had been a nurse long enough to know the signs of hypothermia, the slow breathing, the numb fingers, the confusion setting in, the body shutting down in its desperate fight to survive. But the worst part was the realization that no one was coming. No one was rushing to save me. The last thing I saw before my vision blurred was the faint silhouette of my father's figure in the broken window above. He stared down at me for what felt like an eternity, his face cold, expression unreadable. He didn't care. Not about me. Not about what happened. All he saw was a mistake he needed to bury. The glass had shattered like my life. And then he did what he always did. He walked away, closed the curtain. "Stay awake, Ellie," I whispered to myself. "Stay with me, just a little longer." I could barely feel my thumb twitching now. My right hand, frozen solid, felt like it belonged to someone else. The tremors in my fingers stopped altogether. I had to move. I had to force myself to stay awake, but it was getting harder. The cold was relentless, suffocating. But I didn't have the luxury of giving in. If I did, I would die. There was no sound in the world now except the wind, swirling and howling in the empty yard. Not even the laughter from inside the house, nothing. I was alone. Suddenly, faint headlights pierced the darkness, a faraway glow against the blinding white snow. A car. I forced my eyes open wider. The crunch of tires on ice became more distinct, closer. Someone was out there. My heart slammed in my chest. Could it be? Could someone have finally seen me? The car slowed, and I strained to make out the shape, the make, the color. It was hard to focus, but the car wasn't unfamiliar. I could barely recognize the make, but I knew the silhouette. A dark blue sedan, old but well-maintained. Aunt Linda. I hadn't seen her in years. She had always been the one to see through my father's charm, the one who wasn't fooled by the polished exterior of our family. I had lost touch with her, the woman who had tried to stay involved after my mother died, but my father had pushed her away. Her car had always been the same. I remembered that. I tried to move, my frozen body screaming in protest. But nothing happened. I was paralyzed, my limbs refusing to listen. The door opened, and I heard footsteps crunching through the snow. My heart beat faster, hope surging like a lifeline. She'll see me. She'll save me. She had to. I could barely hear her voice, muffled by the distance, but I caught a word here and there. She was frustrated, talking about the cemetery. Was she visiting my mother's grave? I didn't know. But then she stopped. I heard her voice change, a slight pause, then, "Emily?" She took a few more steps forward, and then I heard it. The gasp. It was sharp, full of disbelief. Oh my God! She was kneeling beside me now, her hands trembling as she brushed the snow from my face. Her touch was fire against my skin, warmth I had long forgotten. The relief, the agony of it, all hit me like a wave. She was here. She saw me. I wasn't alone anymore. "Ellie, what happened?" Her voice was breathless. "Oh my God, you're freezing. I fell," I whispered, my voice barely a sound. It took all the strength I had to get the words out. I could barely speak, and I felt myself fading again. No, stay with me, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I'm calling for help. Hold on." Her hands were shaking, but she dialed quickly, her words sharp and urgent. I could hear her clearly now, even though the world around me felt like it was slipping away. She was calm, practiced in urgency like me, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the fear she wasn't letting show. "Hello? Yes, I need an ambulance immediately. My niece is unresponsive, and she's severely hypothermic. She may have spinal injuries. She fell from the second story. Please hurry." I could barely make out her words, but the calmness in her tone only made my heart beat faster. She was here. She was my anchor. I felt her scarf being wrapped around my neck, felt the warmth of her coat covering me. Little by little, she spoke to me again, her voice shaking. "I tried to call earlier. I knew something wasn't right. I should have come sooner. I wanted to speak, to tell her it was fine, that she didn't need to blame herself. But I couldn't. My eyelids fluttered, but I held on, just a little longer. My chest tightened, each breath colder than the last. The sound of her voice was the only thing keeping me tethered to this world. I had no idea how long it took, but I heard it finally. The sirens, faint at first, then louder. They were coming. I felt her hand squeeze mine, tight, desperate. "Stay with me, Ellie. Don't close your eyes. Help is on the way." My mind was so foggy now, but I held on, as tightly as I could, waiting for the paramedics, for the one person who might finally believe what had happened. That was when I heard something. The front door of the house opened. I couldn't see who it was, but the heavy footsteps told me someone was walking out. My heart skipped. Walter. Had he come to check on me? The crunching of snow grew louder, and I could hear him muttering to himself. "Who's out here?" His voice, low and controlled, sent a shiver down my spine. Aunt Linda stiffened beside me, standing between me and the house. She didn't let him get any closer. Her voice cut through the air, sharp. "Stay where you are, Walter. Don't come any closer." Silence. He didn't speak, but I could hear him retreating, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Aunt Linda knelt again beside me. Her grip tightened on my hand. "He won't hurt you again, Ellie. Not ever again." Then I heard the sirens grow closer, their wail louder than ever. The rescue was coming, but for a moment, all I could focus on was the faint echo of Walter's steps retreating into the house. The truth was about to come to light, and it would come with consequences. But would anyone believe me? The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing me inside a world of fluorescent lights and harsh medical noises. I barely felt the movement as they wheeled me down the cold, sterile hallway. The pain, the cold, and the dizziness made it hard to focus, but something else gnawed at me, something darker. Was it all just an accident? A nurse hovered over me, adjusting the oxygen mask on my face, while another checked my core. "Stay with us," she murmured, her voice the only sound that cut through the disorienting hum of the machines. I was drifting in and out of consciousness, but there was something else. A faint but persistent buzzing at the edge of my mind. Walter. My father. His face, his cold, emotionless face, haunted me. The way he'd looked down at me through the broken window. The way he walked away. He didn't call for help. The thought whispered through my foggy brain, but I couldn't shake it. Why hadn't he called for help? Why hadn't he done anything? "He won't hurt you again." Aunt Linda's words echoed in my mind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the push. There was more, so much more, and I had to find out what. The hospital room was small, clinical, devoid of warmth. The machines around me beeped in their steady rhythm, reminding me that I was still alive. But I wasn't sure for how much longer. The doctor had been blunt when he spoke to Aunt Linda. My body was shutting down from the cold. My pulse was weak, dangerously so. I had barely managed to hold on. I wasn't sure how much time had passed before the door opened again. A man walked in, his expression calm, controlled. The same man who had been beside me in the ambulance, checking my vitals earlier. This time, he wasn't wearing his uniform. This time he had a badge in his hand. "You're awake," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm Detective Harris. We need to talk." I blinked slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. My mouth was dry, my throat sore, but I managed to croak out, "About what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled up a chair, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something about him, an intensity, a kind of urgency behind his calm demeanor. "You've been through a lot," he said, his gaze softening for a moment. "But I need you to tell me what happened. We're piecing together the story, but we need your side." I felt the pressure building in my chest. I had wanted to speak earlier, when Aunt Linda had been holding my hand, when I felt the warmth of her touch and the sting of reality sinking in. But I couldn't. Now here it was again, the question I had been dreading to answer. I tried to sit up, but the pain shot through my spine like an electric jolt, and I gasped. Detective Harris noticed, his eyes narrowing. He placed a hand on my shoulder, gently guiding me back against the pillows. "Don't force yourself," he said quietly. "You've been through enough." The quiet authority in his voice made me hesitate. He wasn't just here for my statement. He was here because he already had questions. Big ones. Ones that could change everything. And I wasn't sure I was ready for them. I fell. I managed to whisper, though the words felt like they burned my throat. It sounded so weak, so fragile. The detective didn't respond immediately, just sat there watching me. The silence grew heavy, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. "You think I fell, don't you?" My voice barely rose above a murmur, but it was enough for him to hear. Harris's expression remained unreadable, but his jaw tightened. "I think we both know that's not what happened." I felt my chest tighten again, but it wasn't from the pain. It was from the fear of what he knew, what he was asking me to say. I swallowed hard. He pushed me. There it was. The truth. The word I had been too scared to say, even to myself. The man who should have protected me, the one who was supposed to be there for me. He was the one who had thrown me out of that window. But even as I spoke, doubt gnawed at me. Was it just that simple? Was it truly as clear as it seemed? Detective Harris leaned forward slightly. We know about the window. We also know about the argument that took place before. But we need more, Ellie. We need the full story. What led to that? My stomach turned. I had never told anyone about the fights before, how they escalated when my mom passed, how my father turned cold, how he pushed me aside. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about the truth coming to light. Tell me everything, he urged, his voice steady but insistent. For a moment I froze. What would that mean for me? What would it mean for him? For my family? But then something inside me snapped. The pain, the cold, it had taken everything from me. I wasn't going to let him take my voice, too. I was trying to defend her, I said, barely able to whisper it. My mother, she didn't know how bad it was, what he'd been doing. She never saw the darkness in him. But I did. I saw it. And when she died, when she was gone, he wasn't just cruel. He was a monster. I could barely meet the detective's gaze, the weight of my confession pulling me down, but I continued. The words spilled out in a rush, my voice shaky but resolute. He pushed me out of that window because I told him the truth. I told him I was leaving. I couldn't live like that anymore. Harris didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on mine, patient but intense. I suddenly realized this was it. The moment everything changed. The sirens, the cold, the blood on the snow, they were only the beginning. There was more to this. There was more hidden under the surface, in the twisted layers of our family, our secrets. And the truth, the real truth, was still waiting to be uncovered. The door to my room creaked open, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a shadow in the doorway. But before I could process it, the detective's next words hit me like a freight train. Ellie, your father is gone. He's disappeared. And with that, I realized the nightmare wasn't over yet. The real game was just beginning. The world outside the hospital window was a blur of white, the snow falling relentlessly, as if to wash away the sins that had gathered under the roof of our house. Detective Harris hadn't left my side, not since the moment he'd arrived. His presence felt like a weight pressing down on me, comforting in some ways, suffocating in others. The air inside the room was cold, despite the warmth of the blankets they draped over me. I was bruised, cut, numb in ways that went beyond the physical. The truth was settling in like a stone in my chest. My father had pushed me. He hadn't just been angry. He had pushed me. And in his eyes it was just another way to control me, to crush me into submission. Your father's gone, Harris said, leaning back in the chair across from me. His eyes were dark, knowing. And I'm going to find him. I didn't respond right away. My mind was still foggy from the painkillers, from the cold that had almost killed me. But somewhere deep in me, a sharp thread of something stirred, something I hadn't realized was there until now. Fear and rage. Do you think he planned this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like too much, too soon, but I needed to say it. I needed to know what he thought. Harris didn't hesitate. Yes, I do. But I don't think it was just the fall that he was after. The words sent a chill down my spine. I tried to sit up, but the pain was unbearable. I gritted my teeth, forcing the strength back into my body. The urge to remain calm battling the panic rising in my chest. What do you mean? What else could he want? Harris stood up, walking to the window, his back to me. The soft hum of the machines in the room was the only sound. After a long pause, he spoke again. There's more to this. Your father's disappearance, the way he's been acting in the weeks before this. All of it's connected. But the question is, why did he push you out of that window? What was he trying to hide? I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting. He couldn't be serious, could he? What else could be hidden in a family like mine? in a house that had already given me so much trauma. It wasn't long before Harris left, giving me a brief nod as he walked out the door. I was alone again, but not for long. The door opened again. The figure standing in the doorway wasn't Harris. It was someone I knew. My stepmother, Caroline. She walked in like she had every right to be there, her heels clicking sharply on the hospital floor. She didn't look at me at first. Her eyes were trained on the floor, her hands folded neatly in front of her. But I knew better than to take her silence as a sign of concern. She finally spoke, her voice smooth, calm, controlled. "Ellie, I'm so sorry about what happened. We've been worried sick." I let the silence stretch between us before speaking. "Don't pretend like you care." Her eyes flicked up, a momentary flash of annoyance passing through her features. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't play the concerned stepmother now," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "You've always known what he's been like. You've been complicit in all of it." Caroline's lips tightened into a thin line. She walked closer to the bed, her high heels clicking on the cold tile with each step. "You think I'm to blame for this? You don't know what you're talking about. Your father was difficult. He had his issues, yes. But what?" I interrupted, my breath coming faster, the anger bubbling up inside of me like a kettle ready to boil over. "He's the one who pushed me out of a window. He didn't even care if I died." Caroline's face twitched, a slight tremor in her hand as she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know, but you don't understand. He was never going to stop." "Stop what? Stop controlling me?" "You didn't stop him either," I spat. "You let him do it. You stood by and watched." Caroline's eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? Fear? She stepped closer to the bed, but there was no warmth in her eyes. Only cold calculation. "I didn't think it would come to this, Ellie. I never thought he would actually hurt you. But you've got to listen to me. You don't know the full story. You don't know everything." Her words hung in the air like a threat, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. Could she be telling the truth? Could there really be more to all of this? Before I could say anything, the door opened again, this time with more urgency. 2 officers entered the room, their faces grim. Caroline took a step back, her posture rigid. "Ellie, we need to talk to you," one of the officers said. I could feel the tension rise. This wasn't just a casual visit. Something was happening, and I had no idea what it was. The officer continued, "We've found something." Caroline's face went pale, and she quickly turned, as if trying to hide whatever expression had crossed her face. "Found what?" I asked, my voice low. The officer hesitated before speaking again. "We have reason to believe your father wasn't just trying to hurt you. He's been hiding something. Something big." My heart raced, but I couldn't form words. The weight of the statement pressed down on me, suffocating. Then the officer dropped the bombshell. "We found a will, and it's not the one your father showed us before." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The real game was about to begin, and I didn't know if I was ready to play. The truth was coming, and it was darker than I ever imagined. The echo of the officer's words still hung in the sterile hospital room. "We found a new will." It wasn't just a will, it was the will. The one my father had kept hidden. The one he'd never mentioned. Caroline stood frozen in the corner, her face pale, her eyes darting between me and the officers as though she were calculating her next move. My heart was hammering in my chest. There was no way my father would leave something so important to chance. The last thing I remembered was the glass shattering beneath me, the shock of the cold air slicing through my body. And now this. The will. My father's hidden plans were unraveling right in front of me. The officer shifted uncomfortably, handing me a folded piece of paper. It wasn't just an envelope. It was a document. A new document. "This came from a safe deposit box," he said, his voice calm, but I could hear the tension in it. "It's signed. but it's dated 3 weeks ago. I felt the weight of the paper in my hands. The signature. The date. I opened it slowly, the faint sound of the paper tearing, like a breath being held. To my wife, Caroline, and to my daughter, Eleanor. The words blurred for a moment. I could feel Caroline's eyes on me, pressing into the side of my face. My fingers trembled as I read on, and a sick feeling crawled up my spine. I, Martin Carver, hereby declare that all my assets, savings, and property, including the house at 354 Lakeview Drive, shall be transferred to Caroline Carver, my lawful wife, and to my daughter Eleanor only if she renounces her claim to the estate. There it was, the truth of it, staring me in the face. My father had been plotting behind closed doors. I wasn't even supposed to inherit a single thing unless I gave up my rights. The words on the paper felt like poison in my veins. I was so close to what was rightfully mine, and now it felt like everything had been set on fire. My hands shook as I folded the will back up, carefully slipping it into my hospital gown pocket, hiding the last shred of the truth from Caroline. You knew about this, didn't you? I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely a breath. I turned my head slowly to face her. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a cold, calculating calm. The mask she always wore. Caroline took a deep breath, her lips tightening, as though she were rehearsing her next line. I didn't think it would come to this, Ellie. I didn't know he would be so cruel. I scoffed. Cruel? You think that's cruel? No, Caroline. Cruelty is the life you and he built for me. Cruelty is standing by while I'm pushed out of windows, and now you're here, trying to play the victim. Caroline didn't flinch. She stood there, her posture impeccable, despite the tension rising between us. You don't know what he's been through. You don't understand what it was like. She paused, stepping toward me with slow, calculated steps. I did what I had to do to survive. And what about me? I shot back, my voice rising, the anger pushing against my ribs. What about what I've been through? All those years watching him tear me apart, and you just stood there, pretending everything was fine. You let him do this. The officers exchanged looks, but Caroline was still composed, her face hardening. If you think this is about me, Ellie, you're wrong. This is bigger than you and me. You know it. We're in this because of him, not me. Not you. I shook my head, my chest tight. This was more than a fight. This was everything. You're right, I said, each word sharp and cutting. It's bigger than all of us, and it's time I find out just how deep this goes. The tension in the room grew thick, suffocating. The officer who had handed me the will stood quietly, his presence a silent reminder that there were no more secrets here. At least, there shouldn't be. But I knew better. There was always more beneath the surface. We need to investigate this further, the officer said, his voice steady. The will's authenticity will be examined, but there's something else. Something we found at your father's office. The words hung in the air like a guillotine, waiting to drop. I didn't need to hear more. I already knew. Something about this wasn't just about the will, or about the house, or about the money. This was something darker. The officer didn't wait for a response before continuing. We found a file, documents, signed papers from a third party, someone with access to your father's accounts, possibly laundering funds. My stomach dropped. Laundering funds. It was a word I had never expected to hear, especially in connection to my father. The pieces were all there. Something was very wrong with everything I had known, and it was about to shatter. Caroline's face was ashen now. No, she whispered, but it wasn't a denial. It was a plea. Who is it? I demanded, my voice cold. The officer only nodded toward Caroline before answering. We'll need you both to come down to the station. We'll go through everything. Together. The room felt smaller now, the weight of impending disaster pressing against me from all sides. As Caroline turned to leave, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing was as it seemed. I had been pushed, but it wasn't just me. We were all being pushed into something we couldn't escape. And the truth? It was buried so deep, I wasn't sure if we'd ever be able to dig it up. Caroline paused at the door and glanced back at me, her eyes harder than before. You're making a mistake, Ellie. You don't know what you're up against. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked at the door, then back at the officer, my gaze unwavering. No, Caroline. You don't know what's coming. And the twist? It was already here, waiting just around the corner. The courtroom was colder than the winter outside. The sharp, fluorescent lights overhead flickered with every passing second, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt as if the truth was being dragged out of me, piece by piece, exposed for all to see. I had come this far, but I could feel the exhaustion of the fight gnawing at my bones. Caroline sat across the room, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes hidden behind layers of makeup that only made her look more calculated. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't the one who had been betrayed. That was me. And now, it was my turn to make them listen. The officer stood before me, his voice steady but with a weight behind it that made my chest tighten. The investigation is complete, he said, and the charges against Martin Carver are severe. Money laundering, fraud, and most importantly, attempted murder. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had known, deep down, that there was more to this, but hearing it out loud, hearing it from someone else, made it real. It wasn't just about my inheritance. It was about the life I had been living. It was about the truth finally being exposed. I could breathe now. I glanced at Caroline again, her gaze unwavering. She had been the mastermind behind it all, the one pulling the strings. But she'd underestimated me. She thought she could control the situation. She thought she could silence me. But here I was, standing in front of them, unbroken. As the proceedings continued, I kept hearing a single phrase echoing in my mind. The truth is louder than any lie. In the corner of the courtroom, my lawyer stood, his hands clasped behind his back, watching as the officers filed in. They had everything they needed. The missing documents, the bank records, the forensic evidence. There was nowhere for Martin to run now. I had to admit, a part of me was still terrified. Terrified of what would happen once this was all over. But another part of me felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The gavel slammed down, and it was official. The trial was over. Martin was sentenced to years in prison, and Caroline was facing charges of her own. But I wasn't concerned about their fates anymore. It was time to rebuild, to reclaim my life. I walked out of the courthouse, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. The world outside was the same as it had always been, but I was different. No longer a victim. No longer a pawn in their game. I was in control now. And with that, I knew there was one thing left to do. I had to let go of the past. It didn't define me. The shattered window, the betrayal, the lies, they were nothing more than pieces of a story that no longer held any power over me. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house, the will, or the power that my father had tried to hold over me. It was about the strength to rise above it all, the courage to stand on my own. I had been pushed out a window, but I was still standing. And that was all that mattered. The wind howled, but I didn't flinch. I kept walking, one step at a time, into my new life. To a future we can't escape, but we can still shape.